Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us here. Again, my name is Alex Gladstein. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of the Human Rights Foundation, which is a nonprofit that helps promote civil liberties around the world, especially under authoritarian regimes. We're delighted to be here with Block today to talk about the role that money plays in the struggle for freedom and human rights around the world, and about how new technologies like Bitcoin can potentially help empower and liberate people. I'm here with the best-selling author, Yeonmi Park. Yeonmi, thank you so much for being here. Yeonmi is also a dear friend of mine. We've been working together on issues relating to North Korea and human rights since 2014. Yeonmi, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background and what you're up to today?
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction. I was born in North Korea in the beginning of 1990s, and my country went through severe famine, and that eventually forced me to escape from North Korea when I was 13 years old in 2007. I escaped to China as a teenager, and when I arrived in China, I was sex trafficked. After a long journey of 2 years, I eventually crossed frozen Gobi Desert into Mongolia, and then I found my freedom in South Korea when I was 15 years old. And now I'm working as a human rights activist, and I try to really, show the world what's happening in the darkness.
Thank you for sharing that, Yeonmi. And you chose to study economics at Columbia University.
Yeah,
Can you tell us about why you have an interest in money and in currency?
I think, since the day I was born in North Korea, the first thing I had to be aware as a child was survivor. If nothing else mattered if we couldn't find food to eat. Hunger means death in North Korea. So I know how economics are so important in the nation, in the political system, because that's almost tying to the survival of people. So that made me really interested in studying economic models and the history of it.
Can you talk to us about your first memories of money in North Korea, whether it be the cash itself, the lack of the banking system, how things worked in the economy? It's just some of your earliest memories of this.
It's coming from North Korea is almost like traveling from a different planet. When I was in North Korea, I actually did not even know the words for like credit card or bank account, or I didn't even actually never seen a bank in my life. And the reason was, before I was born, the regime promised people to deposit their money in the banks, and then people did. And then as soon as people deposited their money, the banks would like lock their accounts and then did not give money back to people. So afterwards, people's faith in the bank completely gone. So nobody was using the bank, and therefore I had no idea what bank was. And the first memory that I have of money is how hard it was for my parents to hide things and carry it. And a lot of times people try to, hide the cash in between their pillows, and the thieves then coming and take them out. So it was a real struggle hiding money wherever we went, or even going to the market, because there was nothing was guaranteeing us that we can own that asset.
So basically, the regime used money as a weapon against the people. And whenever someone maybe would try to start a business or have enough money to do something productive, the government would try and take it. So this, of course, led to this massive underground economy, as you describe it. So here's where cash obviously played a very important role. And as one can probably understand, because people didn't trust the banking system, they saved cash maybe for decades. They saved won notes. And as Yeonmi is describing, they saved them at home. They hid them. They hid this physical cash. But then something truly awful happened toward the end of the 2000s. There was a great demonetization event. Of course, when we say demonetization, it sounds like some, technical term, but it actually hides an enormous amount of human suffering. It's a euphemism for total economic devastation. Do you want to talk about the demonetization that happened in the late 2000s in North Korea?
Yeah, so it was around 2008 or 9. North Korea came up with this policy called the currency exchange, which meant that North Korea is not gonna bring a new currency for the people. The real problem was they thought this was a perfect way to equalize people because North Korea is found the idea of like socialist paradise where nobody is richer than anybody else. And the regime used money to control people and making sure that everybody is equal, and which means really starving and poor. And the regime thought a lot of people gathered and working the black markets and they gathered a lot of assets. So they thought, how can we steer this from these people? And they said each family, per family of four, they only allowed to exchange it to new currency certain amount. And that amount was equivalent of buying 2 kilograms of rice. So it didn't matter if you're a trillionaire or billionaire or millionaire. It didn't matter when it came to new currency per household. The only time they could change money to was 2 kilograms of rice money. And even this, the most of people in the countryside did not hear about it, and only the elite knew about it. And then they only gave the time period, like deadline of 2 weeks. So there were lines of people trying to change this money, try to at least get a bit of money out of this, and they couldn't. So massive people burned their cash and threw themselves in the river and killed themselves for the first time in North Korea.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially during this event, you had the government try to make everybody equal. So again, no matter what your background was, or how much money you had worked really hard to save over the previous years and decades, you were only able to exchange that for a certain amount of rice. So we call this time theft. This is the idea of time theft. This is the idea of the government essentially getting you as a citizen to contribute to its endeavors, and then using money as a weapon to steal your time. And as you say, that was incredibly depressing for people who, it's not like by that point people were, that optimistic anyway. They had just gone through a horrible, horrible decade of starvation and shortages. But this was really the kind of last straw for many. And it actually sparked quite a few people to leave North Korea. Before we get on to, your work in China today, do you just want to talk a little bit more about the psychology of money in North Korea in terms of like, what did the regime want, people to think about with regard to money and economics? Tell us about some of the maybe even linguistic, maybe tidbits or pieces of information that you can give us in terms of words for certain things, and then when you got to the free world, like what shocked you the most?
So in North Korea, until the 90s, the economy was heavily subsidized by the Soviet Union. So the regime was able to give people public distribution and not mass, like population was dying from starvation. However, in the 90s, the regime couldn't get the subsidy from the Soviet Union, and they chose to let millions of die from starvation. And during this time, people started realizing they had to trade. And the funny thing about trading is that once you start trading for yourself, you do start thinking for yourself. And that's why trading is a very dangerous thing for North Korean regime. Until even this day, regime bans the word profit. It's an evil, greedy word that they demonize as soon as somebody starts like making a profit. And even my mom was telling me, until the 90s when I was a child, she thought like the money was a dirty thing, like something was not honorable thing. And they thought their only agenda and only purpose in life was serving the party and the revolution. So most of North Koreans really did not understand like what the economic policies can affect their lives. And they don't even know the word, something called like free market. So when I was in North Korea, actually, my understanding of money or economics was like zero.
Yeah, and that's the way that the government wants to keep it. And you could say the same thing for most governments and countries around the world. They don't want you to know how the money works. That's usually a well-guarded secret, especially in North Korea. So what you're describing is a history of a country that used to be dependent on, a foreign supporter, and where people used to have rations, essentially, where the state would just provide the basics. And then how that completely broke down in the 90s and started to shift to a country where everything was kind of done informally. And people, again, as you and your family had to start to trade. had to start to barter, had to start to think independently, you know, already did savings and loans completely outside of the state's mandate. And this, of course, was dangerous for the government. So they've tried to crack down on this, but it's something that's impossible to stop. And of course, along the same lines, as that trade started to happen, as things started coming in from China, right, into this country that was previously like completely sealed off, you started to have outside information come in too. And that's the work that we've done together at the Human Rights Foundation is get more than 100,000 flash drives of outside books and films and media into North Korea to help people understand what the wider world is like. So I guess it's fair to say that we've seen the regime really erode in its ability to control the people. And that's happened in a financial sense with money and currency. And it's also happened in an information sense. And that's a big part of your story too, right? The trade, the change in the way the money system and economic system worked led to you learning about the outside world, right?
Yeah, that is the outside information. That was the first time I even realized there is a world outside of North Korea. I never even seen the map of the world, so I had no idea what the world looked like.
What about you know, I think for this audience it'd be good to share a little bit about how that information that was brought on by economic change transformed you. Can you talk to us a little bit about how absorbing outside media was a shock to you, you know, before you left?
Yeah, so in the 90s, as I said, like after the famine, and people really realized they had to find their own ways to survive, which means finding or going to black market. But when we say black market in North Korea, it's not like selling drugs or weapons. It's really selling rice, clothes, DVDs, like the daily life things that people consume. So a lot of people were going to China and smuggling these DVDs through the border. And my uncle somehow obtained the movie Titanic. And as a young girl, I was watching this movie. I've never seen a movie was made for love story. And in North Korea, there's even no word for love. The only love that people are allowed to know and express is when we say, I love you to dear leader. We cannot use that word to describe to our feelings to another human being, other than the dictator. So seeing that there's a movie made about this story about human love, and a man can die for woman, and not the party and not the revolution, that really shook me to the core. And that gave also a taste of freedom for the first time in my life. And I think that's when I started realizing, you know, what a different planet that I was living in.
When we talk about like a change in North Korea, it's probably important to, I guess, remind the audience that when you escaped and when most North Korean defectors left, they weren't chasing some idea of democracy. I mean, you probably didn't even know what that meant. You were leaving for more food, more opportunity, more economic opportunity for you or for your family. So while we treasure political freedom, we have to often think about and understand that, you know, economic, you know, considerations often come first, which I think makes the next part of our conversation really interesting, because the work you do now, you've escaped. You told us about how you made it to South Korea, and now you live in the United States. And a lot of your work, aside from what you do with us at HRF and sending information into North Korea, relates to helping people who are stuck in China, North Koreans who have been either trafficked or who've tried to escape. Can you tell us a little bit about that work that you do today and what goes into the process of rescuing someone who's stuck in China?
Yeah, so as I said, you know, when I was escaping from North Korea, the only reason that I escaped was to look for a bowl of rice. I did not know what freedom of speech was, what democracy was. Only thing that I wanted was finding food. And this is a common reason that leading a lot of North Korean defectors to escape China. And currently there are around 300,000 North Koreans, and most of them are young girls just like me. And when they go to China, because of Chinese one-child policy they used to have, that there's like more than 30 million Chinese men cannot find wives. So almost state sanctioned, like the Chinese government is supporting this. they allow this kind of human trafficking happen, and Chinese human traffickers buy North Korean girls for sex toys. And I was sold for less than $300, and my mother was sold for $65 in the 21st century right now. So daily, every day, there's modern day slaves in China, and my work is around trying to get them to come to free world. And it was actually a lot easier before the pandemic, and the surveillance was not as bad. But nowadays, actually, it became really, really hard to rescue them. So instead, we are rescuing them. We try to support them in some way so they can make life somehow bearable for them living in China and as a slave.
And when it comes to your work, the actual work that you do, um, you're working with contacts inside China,
Mhm.
and sometimes people need to be paid. And the brutal truth of it is that sometimes someone who has possession of a woman or a girl, needs to be paid to
Mhm.
liberate that person. And I know that that's not an ideal scenario. It's not something that we like to think about. And freeing individual people is not going to lead to systematic change, right?
Yeah.
But every life is important, and the work that you and many others do to rescue individuals is heroic stuff. So at the end of the day, you've got to get money
Mhm.
there, and that's really hard, right? So do you
Mhm.
want to talk to us about how that's been really difficult, and how about Bitcoin has started to actually enter the equation here?
Yeah, so among these 300,000 nursing women, they are forced, raped daily, and they are forced to give birth to children in China with these gangsters. And there are about estimated 1 million children who are stateless. So the Chinese government does not give ID or any identity to a child who was born between North Korean mother and Chinese father. So these children, without in China, without any identification from the government, you cannot even go attend the elementary school and learn how to write your own name. So what happens to these 1 million children? They are gonna be the ones also sold on other brothels and become sex slaves. And they are continue to be marginalized, not only the mothers, but the children. And the children's children continue that path of slavery in China. So we try to help these people, but then they don't have identification cards, so they cannot go open a bank account. You need identity to open a bank account, and no North Korean defector can have that. So the only way we could send them money so these children can get a bit of education and find a tutor so they can like even learn how to spell their name, that was sending Bitcoin, because when you send Bitcoin, they don't need an identification card from the Chinese regime to open it and use Bitcoin. And that's how it's been so helpful to empower these people and these children.
Yeah, I mean, we think about new monetary technology, created scarcely 12, 13 years ago, that just changes the paradigm completely. And
Mhm.
you look at the Bitcoin white paper, and at first you read it, it's very technical. You're like, I don't know what's going on here. Peer-to-peer cash, okay. But really, when you zoom out and see the kind of human impact it started to have, you realize the tremendous potential for a very simple idea, an open currency that's accessible to anybody in the world, no matter their gender or nationality or income level or whereabouts. And you have this remarkable ability for people inside China, let's say,
Mhm.
to set up a Bitcoin address by a very brief moment of internet connectivity. And then they can leave they can, throw their phone away, or they can like get cut off from internet access. And you and I can still send the funds, and they get there right away, very consistently, with no censorship possible by the CCP or the North Koreans or any other foreign power. And then later they can come and restore that address and have those funds. So this like remarkable resilience of the network is really shining in certain areas. I
Mhm.
also just wanted to ask you about kind of the philosophy of Bitcoin. I mean, you're somebody who grew up in a totalitarian society, right, where the state controlled every aspect of life, and that was made possible in large part because they controlled the economy and they controlled the money, right, as we've discussed. So, what does
Mhm.
it mean to you as you've started to learn about and understand that there's a new money that nobody controls? I mean, how does your mind interpret that, and ultimately, what do you think it's going to mean for dictators like Kim Jong-un?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think coming from North Korea, the biggest evil that I've ever seen was the big government. And when this absolute power corrupts absolutely, I know what monstrous thing they can become. There hasn't been a thing actually killed more individuals than in dictators like Stalin, Mao Zedong, Kim Jong Un, like Hitler. Like there are so many governments took all the power from people and they found a way to oppress people. And the money is the number one thing they control. So to me is that when I heard about Bitcoin that this is not controlled by any government and anyone, it it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe that. Like if we get this liberty and this ability to control money within ourselves and not letting government to control, I think that is really the first step to be truly free individuals and fulfill our potential. So yeah, as soon as I learned the how the Bitcoin works, I became a like huge believer.
Yeah, and just as a thought, we've heard your story, and certainly information played a big role in activating your mind and in making you realize that the world was big outside and that you were kept in the dark, right? I mean, certainly technology and culture played that role, but what made you leave was economics, right? Was the brutal, stark nature of the lack of opportunities, resources. So when we think about something like Bitcoin, we've already seen the enormous impact that technology has played in changing North Korea with regard to how films and books and knowledge have started to really shift culture inside the country. I don't think the Bitcoin moment has really quite arrived yet in North Korea. I mean, clearly we know that there's some activity there that's been charted and documented. But it's quite clear that the overall vast number of North Koreans haven't quite understood the potential of this yet. And the cool part is that the Bitcoin network is open for them. It's open for business, for anyone who can get just the briefest moment of internet connectivity. And you know what? That's more and more possible for North Koreans today, as they already go to the border regions to do a Skype call with their family in South Korea, or receive a remittance or receive a care package. So more and more and more North Koreans are finding a way onto the internet. So I think it's just a matter of time before they discover this remarkable tool. And that's why I was excited to have some of the works that I've done on Bitcoin translated into Korean, into free PDFs, and hopefully they make their way into your former country. What do you think about that? Do you think that would be an interesting idea to get information about Bitcoin into the hands of North Koreans?
I mean, absolutely. Actually, I've been doing that, sending money to the people that I left behind for many years. And because North Koreans cannot have bank account, I have to find a broker in China, and then I have to find a broker in North Korea. So actually, the commission is like 80% loss. The Chinese broker takes like 40%, and North Korean broker takes like 40% off. Then what ends up in the hands of my loved ones, like 20% money left there, because we have to go through Chinese bank and then take the money out, cash out, go to the border and wrap it in the plastic bag and with the rug, and we throw across the river, and then they have to go drive the guards on the North Korean guard side. Then they get the money and then split the money. So it's very hard to send the resources and support to North Korea because of they cannot have this modern technology. But these brokers do have the smartphones these days, and as you said, they do Skype. We do send pictures and videos, so we can skip to complete this line of Chinese broker part, at least for now. And if North Korean broker has a smartphone with the internet, we just have to cut line, and then eventually more North Korean people have a smartphone with the internet. We don't even need that third person to do that transactions.
Wow. Well, I mean, what you just said is the perfect example of how broken money is today for most people in the world. I mean, we've heard so many powerful stories today from all over the planet of people who struggle with money from a personal sense, from a political sense, from a humanitarian sense. And now we have a technology that just allows us to just sort of cut through all the nonsense. I mean, you're saying that up to 80% or more of what you try to send to somebody gets taken. Well, if someone can set up an address, we can get the entire value we need into their hands. they'll still end up paying a fee, of course, to sell the Bitcoin into local currency, but it's not going to be 80%.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what you're seeing around the world today is people waking up to this. So it's a dark time for sure for us in the human rights community. It remains dark for North Korea. I mean, it's amazing that you continue to do what you do because the reality is not that many people care. You know, it's this sort
Mhm.
of dark spot on the world and on our essentially on humanity's conscience. But there is a little bit of a glimmer in terms of a young generation, pushing the country in the right way, and maybe Bitcoin will be a tool to help them. So thank you for sharing everything with us today, Yeonmi. Is there any way that people listening can follow you? Can you tell us about where you are on social media, what kind of books you have, maybe where you are on YouTube, and how can people learn more and get involved with what you're doing?
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel called Voice of North Korea by Yeonmi Park. I have Instagram and Twitter, Facebook. The handles are Yeonmi Park NK. And I have a book on Amazon, but they can find me anywhere on social media platforms, not the
And
TikTok.
tell us the name of your book.
In order to live.
Fantastic. And then you have a new one coming out, right?
Yeah, it's this February.
And what's the name of that one?
While time remains.
Why Time Remains. Well, thank you again for being here, Yeonmi. I've learned so much from you about what money really is and how it connects us and how it can hurt us and how it can cut us apart. So it's going to be exciting to spend more time with you in the coming years as we think about ways that Bitcoin can help the most vulnerable around the world.
Thanks,
Thanks
Alex.
again.
Thank you.